Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1024 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. I think the best way to describe this chapter is subtle. When I first read the chapter, or as I was reading the chapter, and keep in mind I also read the spoilers, when you boil the chapter down to just like little blurbs of text, I don't think it really conveys why the chapter is good. To be honest, this is true every week, but I feel like it was especially true this week. But like I was saying, I was about halfway through the chapter, and it felt like, okay, this is gonna be a setup chapter, maybe even a meh chapter, like literally like a 5 out of 10 for me. I know everyone has their own scales, but I would say that the vast majority of chapters since, before we got to chapter 1000 have been in the 8.5, 9, or 10 range for me. So this, I felt like halfway through the chapter, oh man, this is going to be a review where everyone's going to hate me. And then we got to that last scene. And like I said in the spoilers, it was basically boiled down to Yamato and Kaido clash, right? Conqueror's Haki, that's not the kind of thing that, I could see that some people might like that, but I was preparing myself to, okay, well this is just filler. And then as I actually read the second half of the chapter, I had a totally different experience. But before we actually talk about it, let's talk about the beginning of the chapter. Let's do this chronologically for the most part. We start off the chapter with some classic Usopp. Everybody is falling from Conqueror's Haki, and then from out of the shadows appears God Usopp, claiming credit for King's Haki. Look, this is an actual discussion. Most people know that Usopp's lies become truth. That's just a thing that's talked about quite often with Usopp. And here, Usopp is literally lying about having Conqueror's Haki. And so, some people want to speculate, well, this is evidence that at some point in the future of the story, Usopp will unlock Conqueror's Haki. I want to make sure that I bring this up and talk about it because I do think that it's a legitimate discussion. And regardless of my opinion about it, you could have a different opinion and that's totally okay, and you might be right because at the end of the day, Oda decides. But I would say that, and I bring this up often, people kind of misconstrue the Usopp's lies become truth thing. And many of the examples, potentially all the examples, although I still haven't actually done the video when I talked about all of Usopp's lies, because skimming through the entire story and notating all the times Usopp has lied is very difficult. But typically when he says something, it's foreshadowing. But it's not always foreshadowing for him. And sometimes, in a case like this, right, it's just, it could just be a joke. He slayed a giant goldfish. No, Dorian Brogy slayed a giant goldfish. It's more accurate way to phrase this. This is what people should say. Usopp's lies are relevant. That's how I'd break it down. But just in terms of character, Usopp doesn't strike me as a person that is capable of having latent Conqueror's Haki. Personality-wise, and all the people that we know that have it, Usopp doesn't fit. It isn't impossible. Perhaps he could have a moment of like Kobe, kind of, from Marineford, where he's super emotionally involved in a moment and it comes out as a force of will. I guess Kobe actually used observation Haki, so a more accurate comparison would be Luffy and Amazon Lily, but you understand me. There's some possibility in that, and that would be major growth for Usopp, incredibly cool. But to casually use Conqueror's Haki, we'll see, but I'm not there yet. My gut says no. And personally, I think that Conqueror's Haki should be rare. If somebody like Usopp gets Conqueror's Haki, then all of the Strats should get Conqueror's Haki, and that would really water it down. I'm perfectly happy with Usopp mastering observation Haki. For instance, Future Sight as a sniper could be really useful. And even having the ability to use armament Haki in certain contexts applied to his weapons, things of that nature, would be in-game very fitting and more plausible to me. But as I said, Usopp's lies are relevant. So Usopp has lied here, so keep it in mind. I thought it was really interesting though that the explanation we're given for the Conqueror's Haki is, they said, this must be happening because Big Mom is fighting on this floor. They're being knocked out by mere echoes of her Conqueror's Haki. But we don't actually get to see Big Mom use Conqueror's Haki, and that's just something that I note in my brain of okay, they say this, and we're supposed to believe it's true, but we don't see it, therefore, it's possible that it's not. And with the context of the chapter itself, keep in mind that the meat of the chapter focused on Yamato and Kaido. It wouldn't surprise me, although it isn't clear, if the truth is all these people were knocked out because of Yamato and Kaido. I mean, that's kind of what the narrator box said at the end, right? The editor's note was a clash of black lightning, which we associate with conquerors. So this could be an example of Oda intentionally being misleading, essentially like, oh, okay, you know, we're supposed to think that this is Big Mom because this is a feat that we expect of Big Mom, but the truth is it's Yamato, which is new and interesting. I think the execution might be a little off though, just because I'm not 100% sure. The next part of the chapter focused on sort of the chaos of the battle. Oda wanted to highlight how it's getting wild. The fire is growing, so it feels like the drama of not only the story, but the scene itself is growing. I really feel like something's got to happen with this fire, though. We had a theory a while ago, that a long time ago, that Big Mom might stop the fire by bringing it to life, which is something we've seen Mother Carmel and presumably Big Mom have both done in the past. So I'm just curious as like, is all of Onigashima going to burn down, or how are they going to put the fire out? Is it just going to rain on them? This is, you know, something worthy of thought, I feel like. Oda's really hyped up this fire to an extent because the logic is everyone's coming together to the live floor because of the fire. We see that with Brook. So it's like creating the fire is an actual problem. Another thing to keep in mind as well is some of the language that Oda has used regarding the Fire Festival. It's very fitting, right? The Fire Festival, entire Onigashima, the entire island, then becomes a bonfire. And we've seen, again, with the specific language of like talking about the dead as the fire reaches up to the heavens. I'll actually read the quote. This is from chapter 1016. Isn't it bright and joyful here, Otoko? The Fire Festival is a time to mourn and celebrate those who have passed. That is why the fires are so high, to reach up to the heavens. As you guys will know, my running theory is that the dead will make an appearance in this arc in some form or fashion. And here Oda's sort of logicking it in some way, which is that the fire, the bonfire in the flower capital is important. The fires are so high to reach up to heaven. And then as all of Onigashima literally burns, you can imagine it's a giant fire that's reaching up to heaven. So you guys see what I'm saying, right? That could be important. I thought it was funny that they're like, oh, well, where's Luffy? And Frankie's like, I have no idea. Last update I got was Momonosuke. And then Nami's like, well, I don't know where Shinobu is either. And I think Momo's with her. And then Frankie's like, no news is probably good news. To which it's like, what? Anybody but Luffy, this would definitely be false. But the last thing that I want to bring up about the first half of the chapter is Robin. We see Brook is carrying her and doesn't want her to set on fire. Of course, that's not going to happen. But will Robin wake up? Will she take the same sort of drug Zoro took? I really doubt it. I kind of get the sense of something like Sleeping Beauty, where Robin's probably going to be asleep for a while, but the story will still focus on her because of the pre-established, or Oda's already established that the Kaido and Big Mom want her. We already know that's true for Cypher Pull as well. Everyone's going to be fighting over her while she's sort of, you know, being carried around unconscious. That's kind of how I see this going. And I wonder, you know, it's just interesting Oda sort of pointed it out. But yeah, Yamato is fighting Kaido. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm surprised how strong Yamato actually is. I'm sure that there's probably going to be some people complaining about power scaling. Maybe there's some legitimate criticism there. Yamato never felt anywhere close to Kaido, but that fight is happening. You could also potentially argue that Kaido is at least somewhat going easy on his child. You know, she says, well, you're trying to kill me, and Kaido's like, of course I am, but still, there's some room for doubt, because I don't think Kaido's complicated. So for him to be holding back slightly would also make sense to me. But it is undoubtable that Yamato is incredibly strong. And this is a worthy point in pointing out, especially because the Yamato for Nakama group and the idea as a whole is highly substantiated at the moment, and you could make a legitimate argument that as of this moment, Yamato is as strong as Luffy, stronger than anybody else on Luffy's crew. So for somebody like that to be traveling with the Straw Hats later as a member of the crew or otherwise is not insignificant. I know a lot of people sort of evaluate Straw Hat candidates based on strength, simply because of the idea of the monster trio, that Sanji and Zoro will always be the second and third strongest members of the Straw Hat crew. Even now that Jinbei's here, I think Jinbei is a clear fourth. He might be included in the group, but he hasn't surpassed them. Yamato, it's close. So for people who buy that logic of power scaling matters, then Yamato might be eliminated as a future crew member. I'm not sure if I buy that or not. It could be true. I'm not saying that it's not. I just don't know how committed I am to the idea. But I will say this. I'm expecting Kaido to go down after this arc concludes. Big Mom as well. I mean, there's a lot of people that disagree that say Big Mom's going down later, but I think that you can assume Big Mom is going down, and I believe Shanks is going down. And so, you see this as an example from Whitebeard's crew, right? Whitebeard was never going to join an alliance with Luffy because Whitebeard was old, but if Whitebeard hadn't been old, he's just so absurdly powerful and he almost overshadows Luffy. I don't think that that's okay when you get to like the end of One Piece where Luffy is the king of the pirates with an army of other seafarers from other pirates to kingdoms and other groups as well behind him. Luffy needs to be the brightest star among them. Having someone like Whitebeard next to you, or Shanks, it doesn't fit for me. If you could imagine Luffy in this final battle with subordinates Big Mom, Kaido, Shanks, Whitebeard, and everybody else, I think that they would be too strong. These top tiers, these old generation folk all need to die, in my opinion. But Whitebeard lost, and his crew was taken over by Marco. So if we have this final battle with Luffy as the Pirate King, probably the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates will be there, and they will need a leader. It could be Marco, it could be somebody else, but there will be a leader of that faction. The same thought exists with Big Mom's crew, right? If Big Mom goes down, well, Katakuri then becomes the default leader of the Big Mom pirates and a legitimate ally to Luffy in this great, colossal final battle. Well, I think and you see this with Chopper, right? Chopper's kind of winning over a lot of the Beast Pirates. So if Kaido goes down, there's a legitimate argument that Oda's gonna prepare the Beast Pirates to join in on Luffy's side much later on in the story as well, and they will need a leader. And it probably won't be King, and it probably won't be Queen or Jack. The candidate that makes the most sense is Yamato. That being true, there might be a place that Yamato needs to go elsewhere, away from the Straw Hats, essentially, that the Straw Hats will continue the journey on their own while Yamato journeys or experiences the sea and then reappears later as the leader of the Beast Pirates. But anyway, if Yamato doesn't join the crew in whatever capacity, this is what I see her role being. And just frankly, if it's true that she's too strong to be a crew member, then this role would fit a lot better as well. We get some more commentary, though, about Yamato's desire to be Odin. And this is still very confusing. I feel more confused about it now than any time before. It's almost so weird that it's difficult to enjoy. Anytime it comes up, it's just kind of like, well, it's okay. And even I resonate more with Kaido, the way Kaido treats Yamato about it. It's like, well, you're claiming to be Odin, so it's a heavy burden. He makes light of it. He makes jokes out of it. He almost demeans Yamato for it. Honestly, it reminds me a lot of Himiko Toga from My Hero Academia, which I love the character, but crazy psychopath. I wonder if that's where Oda got his inspiration, now that I think about it. Basically, my brain is looking for a way to transform Yamato from something that is very confusing and thinking of her as kind of crazy to a place where it's like, oh, this is what's going on. And my solution is Odin's logbook. I think that We've talked about how Odin knew things that were going to happen. There's prophecies of some kind that he became aware of in some fashion. But he knew, for instance, that there would be a war in Wano in 20 years. And there's other things, context clues, which suggest that Kaido knows something as well. I mean, Odin mentioned that Joy Boy would appear. Kaido sort of selected this island for a reason. He's stationed here for a reason. I also think that it has to do with prophecies. And I think that some of these prophecies exist in Odin's journal, which Yamato has read, and it was brought up again in the chapter. And my theory is, and this is of course just a theory, but this is how I translate into a way that I like. My theory is that in Odin's logbook, Odin reveals that he will appear, that somebody will become him. And so the piece that we're missing, the context of why Yamato wants to become Odin, is this. She has read the logbook, she idolizes Odin, and now sees an opportunity to become him. Because it's prophesized. Somebody will. So she's not crazy, it will actually occur. But you might be thinking to yourself, JB, Yamato actually becoming Odin is just as absurd as believing it. Well, I've already said this, but I'm gonna say it again. There's something about the dead in this arc, and Yamato wears the ribbon, the rope around herself, which we see again in this chapter, right? The rock in the cave that they're in has the rope tied around it. That is a Yori Shiro, and it's essentially an object capable of housing a spirit of a kami, or a spirit in general. And this not only applies to objects like rocks and trees. Earlier in the arc, Big Mom destroyed a Yorishiro tree, but it applies to people as well. Like, for instance, Yokozuna, the sumo wrestler, wears the same rope around him and is said to be inhabited by the spirit of a great kami. So the idea is Yamato wears the Yorishiro during this fire festival, this day in which the fires reach up to the heavens. Odin's spirit is going to come down and possess Yamato. That is what I actually believe. It seems like a wild idea, right? That where did Oda even come up with the idea of Yamato having an obsession with becoming Odin? There's been a lot of discussion about this becoming a man. It's not becoming a man, it's becoming Odin. It's so absurdly specific and out there. This is the way, in order to, for me at least, for it to make sense. And Yamato has read the journal, this information exists within it, and is captivated by the idea of playing this role during this climactic battle. Further foreshadowed by the fact that Odin has literally appeared several times before now. It isn't the real Odin, but the idea of it has been planted in not only our minds, but characters in the story's minds, so for it to actually happen would be very fitting. The reason I bring this all up right now is that without this headcanon, all this Odin stuff, I'm not sure if I would enjoy it. I think some of the disconnect between me and other people is, yes, you can just throw a thing into a story and it could technically, it's author's prerogative, right? But when it comes to really popular stories and a storyteller like Oda, everything is included for the payoff moment, or at least things that Oda devotes a lot of the story to. Not offhand mentioned, but like repeatedly, this is going somewhere. And so you got to be thinking about, okay, Yamato wants to become Odin, as how can this become a payoff moment? And I think that not too many people have actually thought about that. This idea works as a payoff moment. I cannot think of another way in which it definitively is like, oh yes, this is what Oda's been working towards, everyone's going to enjoy, which is why I believe it. But anyway, this is where I really started to enjoy the chapter, with Yamato in the cave with the samurai. First off, it's implied but not outright stated, so might as well say it here, that the leader samurai that was in the cave is Shimotsuke Ushimaru, the former daimyo of Ringo. You look at him, he looks like old Zoro. It is incredibly likely that this is Zoro's father. But the thing that I like so much about this is it hit me emotionally. Sort of the realization that this is Oda's love letter to Japanese history, Japanese culture, and samurai culture. This isn't just a thing that Oda's including in the story, he's sort of chosen a moment to cherish Japan itself. I want to be really clear about this. This isn't some kind of Japanese propaganda. Oda's not just like all sunshine and roses. Japan's history is just all great, right? There's many things in Wano in which Oda highlights the problems with Edo period Japan. At the very beginning of the arc, for instance, Oda highlights the problems with classism, of how the samurai see themselves as above everybody else and abuse that power. That's very real to Japanese history. I read somewhere that it wasn't uncommon for travelers on the road to bow their heads and refuse to look at passing samurai for fear that the samurai might just decide to pull out their sword and cut off their head on a whim. That's brutal. I also think that through Orochi, Oda is commenting on how, the power of the shogunate was abused. Oda decided to include the Kokeshi dolls, which a theory as to their origins is that they represent the children, the souls of the children that were lost here in Wano. But this same phenomenon occurred during Edo period Japan, where there was rampant infanticide. There's been low-key panels where we see in the background where a mother is threatening to stab their child. And this is also real to Japanese history because they would rather the child die than die of starvation. And another thing, through Hiyori, I feel like there's some hints towards a future of the story where Oda comments about women's roles in Edo period Japan, keeping in mind that as soon as Edo period Japan ended was when women's rights really started to become a focal point in Japanese society. Hiyori's basically said that as a woman, even if she might want to help in the battle in some way, it's her duty as a woman to sort of sit on the sidelines and be a cheerleader. Of course, I don't actually think that she's going to do that. In fact, Hiyori may have already played a role in the arc. Remember the shadow, right? People speculate that's Hiyori. So, it's breaking that code, and in a sense, it's Oda sort of saying something about what's right and just and what's not. Hiyori, just the same as any man or any samurai, should have the freedom to be able to put her life on the line for the things that she believes. But the point is that the criticisms of Edo period Japan are present, and Oda doesn't shy away from them, which I think adds the validity of this is how Oda sees it. And so in this chapter, it's the opposite of that. It's like what Oda loves about Japanese culture and way of life at the time. He's showing us what a true samurai should be. This is Bushido, and it isn't just a thing, at least in the story, it isn't just a thing that people say that they should do. It's like some actually did it. And in a way, sort of explaining, and we're all enjoying it together, of how much that captivates him and influences him. It's a kind of profound selflessness. The truth is that the thing that the samurai did in this chapter is not new to the story, right? So Yamato shows up in the cave and she doesn't know what to think about these crazy samurai. Certainly doesn't seem to think about them like she thinks about Odin. And then Kaido's like, okay, well, I'll leave some food. You samurai must be very hungry. And drop some swords as well. You guys can fight over it. And so Yamato's sort of preparing for the worst, and without even a second of hesitation, they give her that food. And I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I felt that. Samurais don't get hungry, as Yamato sort of cries to herself, I feel hungry, as though sad that she's not a samurai, like Odin. But the truth that we know that she doesn't know at this time is that, of course, samurai feel hungry, but they put that aside when necessary for other people by sheer force of will. And like I said, we've seen this elsewhere. This is essentially Zeph and Sanji, right? It reminds me that this moment earlier in the story was really inspired by samurai culture. It was a cool moment then, but now Oda's sort of reframing it as this is the parts of old Japanese culture that I fell in love with. And really, we all have. And you know, this is just an aside here, but this is a part of, you know, the inherited will in One Piece that really inspires me. Just as a person, like spiritually, right? There's, you know, I don't know if I believe in the inherited will, but the characters that do in the story, you can see how it impacts the decisions they make. It's so much easier to be selfless, to put aside your own wants and needs, and just in general live more carefree. When you have this such strong faith and belief that the things that you desire in this life, you know, somebody else will take that and accomplish it for you. It's something like this that you could really see as being additive with this Bushido, with this samurai culture of, you know, nowadays I feel like a lot of people are very selfish, right? It's just, what do I need? What is the thing that I want? Without a mind towards anybody else. So you can really understand why it's so powerful when people are selfless. And a very true example of that in this One Piece chapter where, you know, it's like I'm choosing someone else over my own survival. So it's not just like, oh, I have lots of money and I give it away, therefore I'm selfless. No, it's like there's a direct consequence, like a hero. But I think that, you know, it's things like the inherited will or real world equivalents which give people the faith and trust in order to be these powerful, selfless kinds of people. And for whatever reason, this chapter made me think about that. And you know, this selflessness is kind of echoed in the title of the chapter in the main line, where Ushimaru says, "I'm nobody important." Again, re-emphasizing what this chapter really is about. The heart of it is selflessness. That feels like the main beat. But yeah, there's some other things to discuss within this that I found interesting. Oda has repeatedly brought up the idea of Kaido killing Yamato. This has been from the very start of Yamato's story. It's just a question that she dwells on. And again, it's brought up in this chapter, where I think one of the samurai says, "Yamato, would your father really leave his child to die?" This is another thing where it gets brought up so often that you know that Oda's going to go somewhere with this. And I'm just, again, thinking about how you can turn this into a moment that would be worthwhile. Really, the best idea that occurs to me is that, and this relates to something we said earlier, is Kaido really wouldn't kill Yamato. Kaido is aware of Yamato's limits. And so the value of repeating it throughout the story is, one, for shock factor when the truth is revealed, and for two, to get a deeper understanding and appreciation of Kaido's character. An interesting thing, right, is that the entire chapter is sort of framed in a very negative Kaido way. But when you really break down what Kaido is doing to Yamato, it's not all that different than how Garp raised Luffy. Like, seriously, think about it. Kaido lets Yamato go into a cave with a bunch of samurai and starve is like Garp throwing Luffy into the jungle or into a pit. It's the same thing. So even though you might, like, knee-jerk react to this as like, oh, Kaido is a bad father, in the context of One Piece, not really. Not based on this. Now, of course, the deeper topical conversation surrounding this is really about parenting. And I don't want to get all the way into it because it is kind of a political thing, which I don't really want to touch. But, you know, obviously you're not going to throw your child out and starve for 20 days or throw them into the jungle, right? Because in the real world, your child would die. And a reasonable parent would know that. But really, One Piece is kind of exaggerated. And I feel like the lesson from this is really just, you know, if you're a parent and you truly love your child, which is the case for, you know, that should be the norm for parenting at the very least, then as the child's parent, you would know the child best. So in the case of Garp, he would know Luffy's limits and put him in the best position to succeed, which is really what happened. And it could be something similar here with Kaido. Again, sort of the comparison between Luffy, Garp, and Kaido Yamato is Garp was like dead set on beating the pirate out of Luffy, and Kaido is trying to beat the Odin out of Yamato. Very similar. It's also interesting that they both failed. I wonder if this relates at all to like Oda's own story. Of course, I don't know anything about Oda, but I just know for a lot of artists in general, there's many stories in which parents tried to dissuade their child from pursuing that path. And there's some logic behind it, but as well, there's a lot of resentment that it's created. You know, it's where maybe Oda grows up and wants to be a mangaka, and his parents are just trying to beat the drawer out of him so that he could go become a lawyer or a doctor. I'm sure he's very smart and could have been successful in many fields, but he sort of like pursued past that. And so in a way, maybe Luffy and Yamato represent in a strange way sort of Oda himself, or people who dream in general. But anyway, again, the chapter was sort of framed in a very negative Kaido way. And you see Yamato really expressing her frustration with everything that's going on. Like, I had people that believed in me, people that accepted me. What right did you have to steal my freedom? What right did you have to steal Wano's freedom? And what Kaido said made my respect for him, this chapter, grew more than in any other chapter without question. He says, there are no easy answers in this world, which further hypes up how complicated Kaido is, and almost promises that whatever he's doing, he has a legitimate reason for, which then could go and relate back to how he treated Yamato. It's not just the actions of an angry, drunken brute who has no love in his heart. No, there's probably, actual reason involved from his perspective. Again, I feel like a thought experiment is really helpful in sort of digging deeper into this. We can go back to the example of a person who wants to become a mangaka. Let's say it's not Oda though, let's say it's me, and I have this deluded belief that I will one day become a mangaka. Full disclosure, that will never happen because I can't draw very well. But I have this belief in my heart. And so if my parents saw my ability and were like, knew for sure, based on their experience, right? Kaido said, you immature brat, so their life experience and things of that nature, it's like, okay, JB, you gotta do something else. But to me, with this dream of becoming a mangaka, in some ways foolish, I begin to resent my parents for that, but the truth is that only the 1% of the 1% of the 1% ever go on to become successful mangaka. And that path probably leads to more heartache than otherwise. So again, in this hypothetical, even as my parents fight against me, and from my perspective as a kid, I resent them, right? They're still doing it from a place of wanting the best for me, for love. Regardless of whether they are right or wrong, that can be true. But I could still turn around and say to them, what right did you have to take away my freedom? And I say all of this to illustrate my point, which is that there are no easy answers in this world. At the end of the day, we are all flawed in some ways. You can't expect everyone to know everything and to have perfect judgment, whether it be children or parents. We all idolize Luffy in this story because he's so brazen and brave. He wears his dreams on his shoulder. He went out to go become a pirate, right? And ultimately he's going to succeed, and he's going to change the world. He's going to make people like Garp look really silly, forever trying to lead him on a different path. But the truth is that in the 99.9% of cases, there's a kid like Luffy who idolizes Gold D. Roger, sets out to sea, and is killed. It all boils down basically to people doing what they believe in on both sides. And I really feel like Oda's sort of moving the story towards that, with some of the conversation from Perospero about Pedro and about really the world of pirates themselves. It's like each faction, whether you believe in Big Mom or Kaido or you believe in Luffy, they all think that they're doing the right thing. And by opposing the other people, they're getting in the way of each other's freedom. And it's easy to say, well, I know right from wrong, but there's a lot of complications, usually. So now I find myself really curious as to exactly why Kaido is okay with what he's doing to Wano, what he did to his own child. There's some great picture that Kaido sees that he's not necessarily willing to explain, but I think at some point in the story he will. And it feels like Oda's preparing us, preparing the story for it to be profound and intriguing. But yeah, as I said at the very beginning of this video, the enjoyment I got from this chapter was really subtle, and I think that I hope I explained that properly. Towards the end of this review of like the little details here or there that really sort of brings the chapter around for me in a philosophical sense. But as always, I'm curious as to what you guys think, whether you know something from the chapter that I might have missed. Share your thoughts. Like the video if you like the video, dislike the video if you dislike the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.